Hi, I'm Chip Rogers, and welcome to the AAHOA Educational Experience. This week, again, we're talking about distribution channel analysis. In fact, that's the name of the book, A Guide for Hotels. And the book we're referring to are written by my two guests, Cindy Estes-Green with Calibre Labs. Thank you for being with us today. And Mark Lamano with New Brand Analytics, formerly the president and CEO of Smith Travel Research. So these two guests, looking at them, you will not know this, but combined about 70 years in the hotel industry between the two of you.
Unfortunately, that is correct.
So
we started when we were 12, though.
You started as a mere child. And Cindy, you in particular worked as a GM. You worked for a corporation. You worked in hotels themselves. So both of you have an enormous amount of experience knowing the business, but also studying the business models and what is going on in the industry. And that's what we want to talk about today. Last week we talked a lot about OTCs, online travel companies, and how the consumer is now being trained to book through the internet, whether it goes to the actual brand.com website or through the OTCs. But one of the challenges that a hotel owner would have, of course, is where do I set my price? You know, going through this type of distribution channel, pricing matters so much, because as opposed to the old days where someone pulls off the interstate and they see 5 hotels and each one of them has a price up on the board and you can choose between those 5. Now you go online and you see 100 hotels. So for owners, the challenge of setting a price is incredibly important, isn't it?
This is true, and it's a hard thing to do. I mean, it's easy in one way, or easier because you have access to everyone else's prices because it's all online now. But the flip side of that is everyone sees your price, and it's gonna, you know, it's sometimes challenging because you feel like, can I really use price? If I lower my price, can I really get more demand from my marketplace compared to what my competitors are charging? But the moment you lower your price, your competitors see the same thing and may lower theirs, and then it's kind of a lose-lose situation and not an advantage for anybody.
A race to the bottom doesn't, certainly, it's good for the consumer. In the short term. In the long term, if you put the hotel industry out of business, that's not good for anyone. But
exactly.
Mark, let's talk about a term that some of us heard in our first year of economics: elasticity of demand.
Right.
And essentially, what we're talking about is, if I lower my price, I mean, if I lowered my price to 0, I would get all the business, but I wouldn't make any money. But there's a point in there where I can lower it and gain enough market share that it pays off. But there's also a point where I lower it too much and you'll never gain enough market share to make up for the lost revenue. I know you guys studied that in the book, and again, the title of the book, Distribution Channel Analysis, A Guide for Hotels. What did you learn about this elasticity of demand?
Well, we did study it, and we studied it at great length. And like you mentioned, you know, there's this feeling that, you know, you can generate enough incremental revenue from having more people in the building and charging them each less. Well, what we found in the study is that's not true. That does not work. Now, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because it used to be, before there was this transparency of rates, like Cindy just talked about, where you can see what all your competitive prices were. Prior to 2000, 2001, you might get some advantage from doing that and for a limited period of time, because your competitors might not know that you had actually lowered your price. But right now, they see that right away. So while you might be able to get an instant of an advantage, it's rarely going to be enough to generate sufficient incremental demand for you to make that work financially. You know, we had a very simple example in the study that basically said that if you had a $100 room rate and you decided that you were going to discount that price by 10% to try and generate more demand, that statistically, on average, you would generate about 3 more rooms. Your demand would go up about 3%. Well, at a 100-room hotel, at $100, that's 3 rooms. So what ends up happening is you're losing $10 on the other 70 that you were selling anyway, and you only have 3 more people, and that doesn't make up. The math doesn't work. And where it really gets not more complicated, but very detrimental to the industry, is that, you know, lodging demand is generally what we call inelastic, meaning that most people who want to travel and stay in hotels for either pleasure or for business are going to do so regardless. Just to give you an example, we both speak a lot, and one of the questions I like to ask the audience when I'm speaking is, okay, this was the worst downturn in the history of the U.S. economy and for hotels since the Great Depression. I say, how many people in the audience think that lodging demand declined less than 10%. Maybe one or two hands will go up. And I say, how many think it's between 10 and 15? You get a smattering more hands. And I say, how many think it's 15 to 20? A few more hands go up. And I say, well, how many over 20? And the majority of the hands go up. So the perception is that lodging demand dropped off the face of the earth. Well, the reality of it is, on an annualized basis, it didn't even drop 7%. So that means 93% of the people still came. But the industry's perception is that nobody came. You start lowering your price, and while you're doing your guests a great favor by making it much less expensive for them to stay, you're really hurting the owner's bottom line. That, with demand being inelastic, means that you can't lower the price enough as an industry, as a segment, to make that work. So like you mentioned, it's a race to the bottom by discounting price.
But Cindy, you also can't raise your price and get it out of kilter with your competition.
Right. I mean, you can raise your price, but the discussion that really needs to happen is there some lever other than price that you can use to attract demand? So if the only thing you have in your toolkit is price, then you're going to have a much harder time functioning in your marketplace. So you start thinking, well, maybe I can give more service, or maybe I can attract customers who like my location or my services better.
Or breakfast.
Or I can offer value-added services. So there's other things that you can do to make yourself more attractive other than just lower or raise your price. And consumers will respond. And as Mark mentioned, the demand doesn't grow that much. The year-over-year demand for the last 20 years is only 1.6%. So there's not a lot of incremental demand, and the demand doesn't change. Even in the worst of times, it didn't change that much.
Right.
So because the demand is relatively flat, because in the United States the hotel industry is fairly mature. So given that fact, you just have to think about ways of taking share from your competitors or moving share from one part of the week to another part of the week. So instead of arrival Monday, departure Wednesday, you try to get a Tuesday or Wednesday arrival to try to fill out your week. So you have to think about shifting share rather than just using price to think that you're going to get more share that way.
And if I could add just one thing to that. Another thing that happens when you modify your price, and like Cindy mentioned, price is the only lever that you're pulling, then it creates in the mind of the consumer even more that this is a negotiable commodity. That this is not, the price is never really set. That you can just kind of keep playing this game where you're kind of offer and bid and ask and all that kind of way of looking at the world. So it's almost, it's not better, but it really training the consumer into ultimately is a bad habit as far as the owner is concerned.
We've got just a minute to go in this segment, but with what is now really instant information, I mean, I can go online and find a hotel price for any hotel in the United States almost instantly. It creates a truly competitive market because now you know exactly what the guy down the street is selling his hotel rooms for. What has that done to margins of profit for the industry? I mean, it would seem like in a truly competitive market, profit margins must go down. Has that happened?
It has happened, but it's a little difficult to measure in the last couple of years because of the decline in overall lodging demand because of the recession. So the answer to that question is a little difficult to measure, but the answer to that's definitely yes. That because more and more rooms are booked through these channels, which in effect have a higher cost than if somebody called you up on the phone or walked in the door or booked on your own branded website. As the higher percentage of those bookings drifted to the OTCs, then that's a higher cost channel. So yes, that would have dropped the profit margins.
Less to do with cost and more to do with the cost of those channels. Less to do with the price itself, right, and more to do with the cost of each channel that the business is coming through.
And we're going to talk about, that's a perfect segue, by the way. You must be in TV. Mark Lamano and Cindy Estes-Green are my two guests this week, and we are talking about distribution channels in the hotel industry. Very important information. We do have to take a quick time out, and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back. I'm Chip Rogers, and you're watching the AAHOA Educational Experience. This week, my guests are Cindy Estes-Green and Mark Lamano, two great experts in the hotel industry, and we are talking about distribution channels. How do you bring business into your hotel? We've talked a lot in the last show and in the first segment of this show about online because that is growing. But what's interesting to note, Cindy, is that we tend to think, those of us, or at least myself, who travel a lot, that wow, online must be 80 or 90% of the market, but in reality it's 10 to 12% of the hotel rooms that are actually booked, correct?
The online portion of the business is about half, and about half comes direct to the hotel.
So 10 to 12% through OTCs, is that?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So, and a portion of that also comes in through, may start online, but comes in through the 800 number. So a lot of business people do searching and shopping, and then they end up coming in and booking through a call center sometimes.
So they look and they see the hotels they want online, and then they see the 800 number and they dial in and
correct.
Go that route.
Yes.
But give us a list of all the distribution channels that really make up the entire market for a typical hotel.
So the dominant channels, besides the property direct, which could be walk-in or groups and meetings, that kind of thing, you've got your OTCs, you have GDS, which is the global distribution system that brings largely corporate accounts, booked through travel agents. You have brand.com or hotel website that are whatever your hotel website is, whether it comes through a brand or not. Even the independents would have their own website. And then you have the call center, which is the 800 number. So there's generally 5 channels that are looked at. Now there are many sub-channels, but those are kind of the dominant ones that are considered.
And Mark, as you pointed out while we were at break, none of these are free. Every single one of them costs the hotel something, correct? They
do. I mean, some are more obvious than others. Like even if somebody actually physically calls the hotel, I mean, there's a, somebody's got to pick up the phone. There's a cost to everything. And the branded website, somebody has to develop the website, somebody has to make sure it's functioning, somebody has to make sure that it actually works the way it's supposed to. All that costs money. Even, I guess the least expensive channel would be if somebody just walks in the door. And the costs associated with that are a little bit more vague. How much advertising did you do? Did you pay for a billboard? Did you do something that made them see that? But each of them had to have a cost. And the reality is the costs vary significantly by channel. It can be as high as 20–25%, even more for some of the online travel companies, the OTCs, to a much smaller amount for some of the other channels.
Quickly, because I think sometimes we forget billboards, but I mean, I'm driving up the interstate and like every third sign is a hotel billboard, right? Is that done more for the purposes of driving the walk-ins into the hotel at the next exit, exit 359, or I guess a portion of that also has to be just simply raising name ID for the particular corporate brand, right?
Sure. I mean, a portion of that would be awareness-based, and but if you're a highway-based and interstate type hotel, that's going to be a primary source of business for you, so it's an important media channel for you to use.
So if you're an interstate-based hotel, I would assume that using a billboard may in fact be more important than online bookings, whether it's through your site, corporate site, or through an OTC, right? Yes,
and a large percentage of the business in some of the highway-based hotels can be 75 or 80% direct to the property. So they may only have 15 or 20% that comes through these electronic channels. But others, on the other hand, may be flipped and may be the reverse. So it just depends on the nature of your hotel and the nature of the business and the type of demand that your hotel can get.
All right, so I'm a hotel owner. I need to analyze my costs on all these different channels. I know, as you indicated, there are 5 basic ways that someone is going to show up at my hotel. 5 channels they're going to come through. But I certainly don't want to use the term, put all my eggs in one basket. I don't want to be a hotel who has 100% of my people being delivered to me through an OTC, because then I'm wholly dependent on what that OTC does. But all these channels, as Mark pointed out, they have different costs. So I guess that perhaps one of the biggest challenges, and I know you write about it in the book, how does a hotel owner balance all those channels and making sure that they're deriving income from each one of them, but realizing that some cost more than others?
Well, that is the primary challenge for a hotel owner, is to figure out what is their so-called optimal channel mix. And every hotel has an optimal channel mix, and every hotel has the right amount that, given that hotel and that market, the benefits of that hotel, the product and quality of that hotel, compared to its competitors, it has the optimal amount to get through GDS and through their brand.com and through the OTCs, and they should use all the channels. But it's a matter of deciding how much to get from each one, and that's a tough decision, but one that should be made taking cost into account, because they do all cost something, but as Mark mentioned, there's a huge difference in the percentage that you may pay. You may pay 10 or 15% for business that comes through your brand website, through fees, transaction fees, search engine marketing, those kind of costs. You may pay more than 50% for business that comes through some of the opaque OTC channels. So you need to make sure that whatever your mix is, that you end up having enough left over, because even though you may give lower rates to your customers, it's really no benefit if you're not making money and you end up going out of business. So you want to make sure that you make enough money to be able to reinvest in the property and have a sustainable business as well. And that's a benefit to the consumer as much as it is to the hotel.
And one thing that I'd like to add to that is what makes this even more important to understand the cost of the channels is the evolution of where this is all going. Like right now, we estimate that about just under 40% of rooms are booked through some sort of electronic channel, whether it's the GDSs or the online travel companies or brand.com. We're estimating that in another couple years that number will be about 50%. So what you'll have is a shift from what is traditionally more cost-efficient channels for the owners, people walking in the door, people calling up, to more expensive channels, the online channels. So you really have to understand that cost as the business evolves toward those more expensive channels.
And that is the way it's evolving, correct?
Yes, there is much more of a move to have more intermediaries. So in the future, it's anticipated that there won't be more OTC type models where actually people make their bookings on these channels, but rather there'll be websites like travel inspiration sites, mobile sites, different kind of search sites that might refer the business to the booking engine for a brand.com or for a hotel's website. But there are several stops that the consumer makes along the way, and there may be small fees for every one of those. So there still will be costs. It's not something you can avoid. It's just a question of knowing the best way to get the business to come through the channels that are most cost effective for a hotel.
And going back to something we talked about earlier, would a hotel, as a business person, particularly in a hotel environment, an empty room brings you nothing. I mean, it's costing you money. You're losing money every time a room sits empty. So there's this, of course, great desire to fill it up at really almost any price. Of course, you could sell it at a price that's still below your cost. I mean, and it would seem to me that sometimes it would almost be enticing to do that through an OTC, saying, I got a few extra rooms, and I just want bodies in those rooms, even if I have to sell them at a cost, less than what I know I have to pay, fixed and marginal combined. That seems like it's got to be a challenge for the industry.
It is, and that does happen from time to time, and sometimes they'll make a decision like that for multiple reasons. If you're a big full-service hotel, you might convince yourself that their ancillary spend, buying food and beverage or using a golf course or the other spend will make up for the fact that you're not covering your technical room costs. But it's still a dangerous game to play because again, you're training that consumer, and there's no guarantee of that incremental spend. So you're kind of trying to cover costs, but as part of the analysis we did on the cost, we kind of estimated that through some of the opaque channels and for some types of properties, they actually lose money on a booking through those channels, that technically they don't cover their costs by the time they run through the price and the commission that the seller gets for them, and a conclusion we made. So,
and I guess too, Cindy, there's also the danger of when you start doing that, you begin to establish a price. I mean, if people begin to think, well, I can get this room at this hotel for this amount, and that amount may not cover all costs, then you're really in a bad place.
Well, the worst thing that's happened is that the consumers have gotten trained to think that at the last minute, when everybody says, oh, I just have a few of these rooms left to fill, at the last minute, a lot of people drop their rates, and the consumers have gotten trained again and again, unlike the airlines where if you wait until the last minute, you're going to pay a premium for your airline fare. Well, in hotels, they've been trained to know that at the last minute, it's no problem, I can still get a cheap rate. So they wait, and the hotels can't forecast well, and they're never sure how much business they're going to get, and their staffing becomes difficult, and the consumers believe that they can get this low rate and come to expect it. And that's extremely damaging to the hotel industry, that practice of that last minute discounting.
And is that reality, that the prices do go down?
It is a reality in many markets, and it's driven by hotels that say, oh, I just have a few more rooms to sell, let me just unload them at a kind of fire sale price. And that's very, very damaging to future marketing for that hotel.
Well, we have flat run out of time. We're not out of rooms, but we are out of time. For my guests this week, Mark Lamano and Cindy Escreen, thank you so much for your information. They will be back with us again next week, so you make sure to join us as well. If you have any questions, you can reach me, chip@AAHOA.com, chip@AAHOA.com. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you again next week.